All right, friends, today we're going to go over our next chapter in The One and Only Ivan. So let's look at our learning target for today. Our learning target for today is I can look closely at different passages in the text to understand what the author is really saying. So what we're going to learn today is called text analysis. Say that with me, text analysis. So you might be thinking, what is text analysis? So text analysis, let's go to the next slide, is when authors often want their readers to have a deeper understanding about the story. To this, the readers have to analyze or look closely at the text to get a deeper understanding of the character's thoughts and feelings and get a deeper understanding of what is really happening. So maybe the author is kind of hinting towards something they want us to connect to or realize that's happening. So let's do this together and maybe it'll make a little more sense. So here's an excerpt from Art Lesson, the chapter Art Lesson. So over here, let's go ahead and read it together. What's a frame? Ruby asks. What's $1? What's a gift store? I close my eyes. I'm a little sleepy, Ruby. Have you ever driven a truck? Ruby asks. I don't answer. Ivan? Ruby asks. Can Bob fly? A memory flashes past, surprising me. I think of my father, snoring peacefully under the sun while I try every trick I know to wake him up. Perhaps, I realize, he wasn't really such a sound sleeper after all. So when we look at the text, we see right here, even if we look before we highlight and talk about it, we might think that Ivan's getting a little irritated with Ruby. Think about if you're super tired or just had a long day and somebody keeps asking you a bunch of questions. Are you going to get irritated? Yeah, probably. So Ruby keeps asking Ivan all these questions, and you see right here, he closes his eyes and says he's a little sleepy. That probably means he's super tired and is getting really irritated. And especially right here when he says he doesn't answer, he ignores her. So our text analysis is Ruby is asking a lot of questions and Ivan is starting to get annoyed. At first he tries to be polite, but then he eventually ignores her altogether. So you can kind of look a little deeper and see that Ivan really is just getting annoyed. And he wants to go to sleep, so he's just eventually going to ignore her. And he begins to he looks at this memory. A memory flashes in his mind. Kind of like what he did to Ruby, his dad did to him. He was snoring peacefully under the sun while Ivan was trying to wake him up. No matter what he did, the dad wouldn't wake up. So Ivan, we can kind of conclude from that or come together from that he begins to realize how his father must have felt when he was little and was begging for attention. And then right here, perhaps I realized he wasn't really such a sound sleeper after all. That kind of hints towards maybe his father wasn't sleeping either, but just ignoring him. Have you ever just not answered somebody and pretended to be asleep, like if your parents wanted you to do something? That's kind of what Ivan's thinking his dad did. He was just kind of going to sleep, pretending he was asleep or playing possum, you might have heard it being called, and just ignoring. So we have to go back in our text and we have to highlight that and explain with a text analysis what we really think is going on, or maybe how they feel. Like we analyzed how Ivan felt right here. He was probably feeling annoyed. All right. So before I start reading today, let's go over our vocabulary words. Our vocabulary words are going to be emphasize, which means to give special importance to something when speaking or writing. Contemplating, thinking about something thoughtfully for a long time. Adless, to make someone unable to think clearly, confused. Shrewd, to be covered from view. Mesmerized, to hold one's attention closely. And pleadingly, the action of begging someone to do something. I'm going to leave those up in case you need it, and I'm going to go ahead and start reading. Today we're going to read From Children to the One and Only Ivan. Children. Once I asked Stella if she'd ever had any babies. She shook her head. I never had the opportunity. You would have made a great mother, I told her. Thank you, Ivan, Stella said, clearly pleased. I like to think so. Having young ones is a big responsibility. You have to teach them how to take mud baths, of course, and emphasize the importance of fiber in their diet. She looked away, contemplating. Elephants are excellent at contemplating. I think the hardest part of being a parent, Stella added after a while, would be keeping your babies safe from harm. Protecting them. The way silverbacks do in the jungle, I said. Exactly, Stella nodded. You would have been good at protecting too, I said confidently. I'm not so sure, Stella said, gazing at the iron bars surrounding her. I'm not sure at all. The parking lot. Mac and George are chatting while George cleans one of my windows. George, Mac says, frowning, there's something wrong with the parking lot. George sighs. I'll take a look as soon as I'm done with this window. What's the problem? There are cars in it. That's what's wrong. Cars, George. Mac breaks into a grin. I think things are actually starting to pick up a bit. It's got to be the billboard. People see that baby elephant and they just have to stop and spend their hard-earned cash. I hope so, George says. We sure could use the business. Mac's right. I have noticed more visitors coming since he and George added the picture of Ruby to the sign. People crowd around Ruby and Stella's domain, oohing and eyeing at the sight of such a tiny elephant. I gaze out at the huge sign that makes humans stop and spend their hard-earned cash. I have to admit that the picture of Ruby is rather cute, even if she doesn't look like a real elephant. I wonder if Matt could add a little red hat and a curly tail to the picture of me. Maybe then more visitors would stop by my domain. I could use a few oohs and ahs myself. Ruby's story. Ivan, tell me another joke, please, Ruby begs after the 2:00 show. I think I may have run out of jokes, I admit. A story, then, Ruby says. Aunt Stella's sleeping, and there's nothing to do. I tap my chin. I'm trying hard to think. But when I gaze up at the food court skylight, I'm mesmerized by the elephant-colored clouds galloping past. Ruby taps her foot impatiently. I know. I'll tell you a story, she says. A real-life true one. Good idea, I say. What's it about? It's about me, Ruby lowers her voice. It's about me and how I fell into a hole. A big hole. Humans dug it. Bob pricks his ears and joins me by the window. I always enjoy a good digging story, he says. It was a big hole full of water near a village, Ruby says. I don't know why humans made it. Sometimes you just need to dig for the sake of digging, Bob reflects. We were looking for food, Ruby says, my family and I, but I wandered off and got lost and went too close to the village. Ruby looks at me, eyes wide. I was so scared when I fell into that hole. Of course you were, I say. I would have been scared too. Me too, Bob admits, and I like holes. The hole was huge. Ruby pokes her trunk between the bars and makes a circle in the air. And guess what? She doesn't wait for an answer. The water was all the way up to my neck, and I was sure I was going to die. I shudder. What happened then? I asked. I'll tell you what happened, Bob says darkly. They captured her and put her in a box and shipped her off, and here she is, just like they did with Stella. He pauses to scratch an ear. Humans. Rats have bigger hearts. Roaches have kinder souls. Flies have... No, Bob, Ruby interrupts. You're wrong. These humans helped me. When they saw I was trapped, they grabbed ropes and they made loops around my neck and my tummy. The whole entire village helped, even little kids, grandmas, and grandpas. And they all pulled and pulled and... Ruby stops. Her lashes are wet, and I know she must be remembering all the terrible feelings from that day. And they saved me, she finishes in a whisper. Bob blinks. They saved you? He repeats. When I was finally out, everyone cheered, Ruby says, and the children fed me fruit. And then all those humans led me back to my family. It took the whole day to find them. No way, Bob says, still doubtful. It's true, Ruby says. Every word. Of course it's true, I say. I've heard rescue stories like that before. It's Stella's voice. She sounds weary. Slowly she makes her way over to Ruby. Humans can surprise you sometimes. An unpredictable species, Homo sapiens. Bob still looks unconvinced, but Ruby's here now, he points out. If humans are so swell, who did that to her? Said Bob, a grumpy look. Sometimes he doesn't know when to keep quiet. Ruby swallows, and I'm afraid she's going to cry. But when she speaks, her voice is strong. Bad humans killed my family, and bad humans sent me here. But that day in the hole, it was the humans who saved me. Ruby leans her head on Stella's shoulder. Those humans are good. They just don't make any sense, Bob says. I just don't understand them. I never will. You're not alone, I say, and I turn my gaze back to the racing gray clouds. A hit. Stella's foot hurts too much for her to do any hard tricks for the 2 o'clock show. Instead, Mac pulls her limping into the ring, where she tracks in a circle in the sawdust. Ruby clings to her like a shadow. Ruby's eyes go wide with Snickers when Snickers jumps on Stella's back, then leaps onto her head. At the 4 o'clock show, Stella can only get as far as the entrance to the ring. Ruby refuses to leave her side. At the 7 o'clock show, Stella stays in her domain. When Matt comes for Ruby, Stella whispers something in her ear. Ruby looks at her pleadingly, but after a moment she follows Matt to the ring. Ruby stands alone. The bright lights make her blink. She flaps her ears. She makes her tiny trumpet sound. The humans stop eating their popcorn. They coo, they clap. Ruby is a hit. I don't know whether to be happy or sad. Worry. When Julia arrives after the show, she brings 3 thick books, 1 pencil, and something she calls magic markers. Here, Ivan, she says, and she slides 2 magic markers and a piece of paper into my domain. I like the sundown colors red and purple, but I don't feel like coloring. I'm worried about Stella. All evening she's been quiet, and she hasn't eaten a bit of her dinner. Julia follows my gaze. Where is Stella anyway? She asks, and she goes to Stella's gate. Ruby extends her trunk, and Julia pats it. Hi, baby, she says. Is Stella all right? Stella is lying in a pile of dirty hay. Her breath is ragged. Dad, Julia calls. Could you come here a minute? George sits beside his mom. Do you think she's okay, Dad? Julia asks. Look at the way she's breathing. Can we call Mac? I think there's something really wrong. He must know about her, George rubs his chin. He always knows. But a vet costs money, Jules. Please, Julia's eyes are wet. Call him, Dad. George gazes at Stella. He puts his hands on his hips and sighs. He calls Mac. I can't hear all of his words, but I can see George's lips tighten into a grim line. Gorilla expressions and human expressions are a lot alike. Max says the vet's coming in the morning if Stella's not any better, he tells Julia. He says he's not going to let her die on him, not after all the money he's put into her. George strokes Julia's hair. She'll be all right. She's a tough girl. Julia sits by Stella's domain until it's time to go home. She doesn't do her homework. She doesn't even draw. A promise. My domain gleams with moonlight when I awake to the sound of Stella's calls. Ivan, Stella says in a hoarse whisper. Ivan? I'm here, Stella. I sit up abruptly and Bob topples off my stomach. I run to the window. I can see Ruby next to Stella sleeping soundly. Ivan, I want you to promise me something, Stella says. Anything, I say. I've never asked for a promise before because promises are forever, an unusually long time, especially when you're in a cage. Domain, I correct. Domain, she agrees. I straighten to my full height. I promise, Stella, I say in a voice like my father's. But you haven't heard what I'm asking yet, she says, and she closes her eyes for a moment. Her great chest shudders. I promise anyway. Stella doesn't say anything for a long time. Never mind, she finally says. I don't know what I was thinking. The pain is making me addled. Ruby stirs. Her trunk moves as if she's reaching for something that isn't there. When I say the words, they surprise me. You want me to take care of Ruby? Stella nods, a small gesture that makes her wince. If she could have a life that's different from mine, she needs a safe place, Ivan, not here, I say. It would be easier to promise to stop eating, to stop breathing, to stop being a gorilla. I promise, Stella, I say. I promise it on my word as a silverback. Knowing. Before Mac, before Bob, even before Ruby, I know that Stella is gone. I know it the way you know that summer is over and winter is on its way. I just know. Stella wants to tease me that elephants are superior because they feel more joy and more grief than apes. If gorilla hearts are made of ice, Ivan, she says, her eyes glittering, ours are made of fire. Right now, I would give all the yogurt raisins in the world for a heart made of ice. 5 men. Bob heard from a reliable source that they tossed Stella's body into a garbage truck. It took 5 men and a forklift. Comfort. All day I try to comfort Ruby, but what can I say? That Stella had a good and happy life? That she lived as she was meant to live? That she died with those who loved her most nearby? At least the last is true. Crying. Ruby cries all evening while her father sweeps and mops and dusts and cleans the toilets. When George sees Mac, he runs to him. I can only hear a few of his words. Bet, should have, wrong. Mac shrugs. His shoulders droop. He leaves without a word. When George wipes the fingerprints off my glass, his cheeks are wet. He doesn't meet my eyes. When all the humans have left, I sent Bob to check on Ruby. How is she? I ask when he returns. She is shivering, Bob says. I tried to cover her with hay, and I told her not to worry because you were going to save her. I glare at him. You told her that? You promised Stella, Bob lowers his head. I wanted to make the kid feel better. I shouldn't have made that promise, Bob. I just wanted... I point to Stella's domain, and for a moment it feels like I've forgotten how to breathe. I wanted to make Stella happy, I guess, but I can't save Ruby. I can't even save myself. I pop onto my back. The semen is always cold, but tonight it hurts. Bob leaps onto my belly. You are the one and only Ivan, he says. Mighty silverback. He licks my chin, and he's not even checking for leftovers. Say it, Bob commands. I look away. Say it, Ivan. I don't answer, so Bob licks my nose until I can't stand it any longer. I am the one and only Ivan, I mutter. And don't you forget it, he says. When I gaze at the food court skylight, the moon Stella loved is shrouded in clouds. All right, we're going to stop there in our reading today. All right, so let me see. Tomorrow what I'm going to have you do is go through and we're going to do the text analysis together from what we read today. So what I want you to do right now is go to the Google form and answer the questions that I'm asking about the chapter, okay? All right, guys, I'll see you later. Go do your Google form. Bye.